As a theologian and sociologist, one of my questions is, I love the Indian Constitution, but when we say the Bible inspired it, I agree with that. But when we talk about empires or nations and countries, how they run, when you take the nation of Israel, uh, their obedience to God and the duration of them as a nation or as an empire was very short. So if that, like let's say a case study, so they a very short period they was as a nation, and the principles that God laid out in the Bible for them to follow as a nation, I don't think they follow they actually practice it, like the year of Jubilee and the 6th year, the 7th year break and things like that. So when we as a country follow the Constitution, which is protects us and which fraternizes, uh, do you have a response to that? How can we say that it is an effective thing, the Bible, because the people that God trusted failed. Today it is the church that God has trusted for us to be proponents of it. And that's one part of the question. The other part is, I often am a strong proponent that the church and the state should never be married. And that also goes to any religion. I believe that the state always needs to be secular. So just wanted to know your thoughts and comments on that.
Thank you. Um, in the next volume of this, How the Bible Created Modern India, we have 2 chapters by Priya Aristotle. She's a Tamilian Supreme Court advocate. One chapter is on Indian Penal Code, the Bible's impact on Indian law, and the second chapter is on the Constitution, uh, the Bible's impact on Indian Constitution. So the details, you might have to wait for another 3 to 6 months to read her chapters, though if you're seriously interested in it, she can send her manuscript to you for review and criticism and comments and improvement, because all of these chapters need help from others. The Indian Constitution of 1950, once the British declared at the beginning of the First World War that our intention is after the war to give home rule to India, who do we give that rule to became an important issue after World War I. We took India from the Mughals, from many Maharajas. Should we return India to the descendants of the rulers? That would turn India into back to feudalism, warring kingdoms. Or how should free India be governed? This became a very difficult question. The first constitution written by Indians for India was by Annie Besant Committee. She was here in Adyar, a theosophist, but she was more of a national visionary. So she called together a committee, I think it was 1921 or so. Tej Bahadur Sapru from Allahabad, he was a very brilliant legal mind. He was the de facto leader of that group, and they wrote the first constitution of how India should be governed. The Congress Party rejected it. Then Congress Party appointed Nehru Committee led by Motilal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru, the son, was the secretary of that committee. And Nehru Committee submitted its report, which was basically a draft constitution of this is how free India should be governed. This is how the British should hand over the home rule to India. The Jinnah and the Muslim League rejected the Congress constitution, that this is not acceptable, and they had a lot of influence here because most of India had been taken from the Muslims by the British. Then Jinnah came back with 14 points, which was, it is called 14 points, but that was basically the Muslim League's proposal for how India should be governed. That was rejected by the Congress. So Indians couldn't agree on how India should be governed, dominant Indian groups. That's why the 3 roundtable conferences was called between 1930 and 1932. Gandhi didn't go to the first roundtable conference. The dominant force was the Maharaja lobby led by Scindia from Gwalior. They were Marathas who had taken over much of North India. So he was leading the Maharaja lobby, and they almost won that, okay, the British should give the power back to the Muslims. But the British realized that this is terrible because India will become feudal once again. So Gandhi was urged to go for the second roundtable conference. That's where Gandhi Ambedkar conflict really grew. Ambedkar's point was that certain constituencies should be reserved for Dalits. At that time, there was no scheduled caste. Um, there had been Simon Commission, and Simon Commission had drawn the schedule. So all of these other constitutions and Simon Committee report was the background of the three roundtable conferences. But Gandhi Ambedkar controversy, they couldn't decide how India should be, who should rule India, how it should be ruled. So Ambedkar's point was that scheduled caste should, or backward caste federation, in their constituency, they alone should vote, so that anyone who really represents them, the oppressed in India, he gets to be a parliamentarian. Gandhi said no. In reserved constituencies, only say scheduled castes or scheduled tribes should run for office, but everybody must vote. So if 10 scheduled caste people run, scheduled caste vote will be divided in 10. Whoever is backed by the upper caste, he will have the money, he will win. This is what ensured that during the Congress era, reservation in parliaments and state assemblies only produced chamchas. So Kanshiram's book, The Chamcha is a very good book. It was showing how the Congress parties, which Gandhi forced it on Ambedkar in his Pune fast, long fast, where the British Prime Minister had ruled in favor of Ambedkar's because Indian delegates couldn't resolve the conflict, so they left it to the British Prime Minister. He ruled in favor of Ambedkar, but Gandhi went on a fast, and Ambedkar was forced that, look, you're trying to save Dalits, at that time Harijans, but if Gandhi dies, this is fastened to death, then tens of thousands of Dalits might die, their houses might be burned. So you better save Gandhi's life to save the Dalits. So Ambedkar finally yielded, and the third roundtable conference was useless. That's why the British civil servants in India, they were then asked to look at all of this history, all the documents that have been produced, to write the India Act of 1935, which became the foundation for the Constitution of India. So Ambedkar's and the Constituent Assembly basically worked from the 1935 India Act. So that's the history of the Constitution in India in a very brief outline. But the whole idea of constitutionalism comes from Israel. It was first articulated by the French Calvinists, the Huguenots, after 1572 massacre. So in 1574, 75, 76, a number of books were written. And a lot of the idea of the constitutionalism, much of the focus came from 1 Kings and 1 Chronicles, where the queen, is it Athalia, who has killed priests. She has become the despot, the dictator, killed the whole royal family. One child was saved by a nurse. He grew up as an orphan in the temple under the protection of the high priest, who knew that this baby is actually the prince. So when he was 7 years old, the high priest organized the revolution in which the queen was killed. And then the high priest wrote 2 covenants. First was a covenant between God and king, that the 7-year-old king, he will serve God. The second covenant was between king and people. As king serves God, people will serve the king. If the king doesn't serve God, then people have the right to revolution. This is what the Huguenots, the French Calvinists, produced, which became the foundation of modern constitution. That king is given power to obey God's law, to do what is just and right. If he disobeys God, then people have the right to disobey him, the right to civil disobedience was part of that, which became the theological basis for American Revolution. That King George is a tyrant, and Bible gives us freedom from tyranny, so we have the right to revolt. So in the American Revolutionary War, if you watch a movie such as Patriot, Mel Gibson, pastors and elders take up guns against King George. On what basis? Doesn't the Bible ask us to obey the authorities? The right to revolution came from that there is a covenant which has to be obeyed. And if the king is disobeying that covenant, then the people have the right to rebel against the king, because we want God's will, not a tyrant's will to rule. This is what inspired Mahatma Gandhi's moral right to civil disobedience. So, US was the first constitution. Britain has no written constitution, not even today. America was the third nation in the biblical sense of the nation, which 13 colonies coming together to become a nation. And America then became the first nation with a written constitution, which inspired Indian constitution, because Britain had no written constitution, so that couldn't inspire Ambedkar. But the opening phrase, "we the people." We the people is the doctrine of sovereignty of every citizen, which was best articulated in Scottish Reformation. George Buchanan was the one who called it popular sovereignty, that every child is priest and king. If everyone is king, that's popular sovereignty, every citizen, we the people. So the basic idea of we the people are sovereign. We elect our leaders and we can throw out our leaders. This is a biblical idea of popular sovereignty, which American theology has lost. You never hear a sermon on kingship of all believers. So your point of, I'm getting tired, of, a separation of church and state. Separation of church and state was a practical necessity in America because 13 colonies had different established religions. If we're coming together as one nation, will Anglicans dominate, or will Presbyterians dominate? Baptists, of course, they had no intention of dominating. But will a state religion be imposed upon everybody? So separation of church and state, the American decision that there will be no established religion. This had the biblical idea of prophet, priest, and kings are different offices. King should not get into the temple to burn incense. That's the job of the priests. But the job of the office of the prophet has to be respected as well. So there was a biblical basis for separation of church and state. The temple and the state are different. But does separation of church and state mean separation of God and governance? This is where secularization of America corrupted the meaning of separation of church and state, that God will have nothing to do with the state. There shall be no Bible teaching in the state schools. There shall be no prayer in the church. When you are graduating, you cannot thank God for your graduation, etc. So the corruption of the doctrine of church and separation of church and state becoming separation of God and governance. This was, American church was not interested, and this was another practical fact was that in Europe, when a denomination got political power, not just the Roman Catholics, Anglicans, when they got political power, they persecuted Puritans, independents. Zwinglians, Lutherans, Calvinists, they persecuted other minority Protestants. So America did not want that. So it is American sociology which became dominant over American theology. That God should have nothing to do with governance, God, which has damaged Europe, damaged America, because in God we trust is still the American motto. It's written on every dollar bill, in God we trust. But in the movie Wall Street, it is changed to in greed we trust. In greed we trust is at the end of the movie Wall Street. That dollar bill appears with in greed we trust. Greed is good. Separation of church and state. So that's the brief history that constitutionalism, that the kings have to be governed by law, comes from God saying to Joshua that the book of this law shall not depart from your mouth, you will meditate on day and night. Moses saying, and Samuel repeating that later, that your rulers, your kings must make copies of this law, read it day and night, not turn from it to the left or the right. Constitution will rule, law will rule. This began to be articulated in modern history, in American Constitution, and we got it from that. So the summary of it is, Constitution is the ideal. You're right that Israel never lived by it, except for short periods. India is not living by it. Police force is still called force, but it is a force without moral backbone. If the police are told to kill somebody, they will kill somebody. If the police are told to arrest this pastor or this evangelist on false ground, they will trump up, they will get false witnesses, they will register FIRs because they're corrupt. They know that if they don't obey wicked politicians, they will be killed or they will be arrested, because the MLA will tell a criminal to lodge a complaint that the police inspector took so much bribe from me. The inspector will go to jail. So, inspector, to save his job, to save his family, to save his life, he has the fear of death rules over him, and India is sinking into corruption. Our judicial system can no longer be trusted. Our police system can no longer be trusted. Our civil servants can no longer be trusted because the fear of death rules, and our force is actually very weak. It cannot enforce truth and justice. That's why a whole new reformation is needed, and that's the third education revolution. And Bonnie is wearing this T-shirt of the third education revolution, which is discussed in the chapter. Actually, there are two books here. One is Moving Backward Cast Forward. In this also I discuss the third education revolution. How do we actually move the backward casts forward? And then, of course, the 10th chapter of this book, The Bible and the Future of India, is all about that, the third education revolution.